Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is August 25th, and quick topic here, and that is why MGTOW is not a thing, I think, in Russia. As I've spoken about in previous videos, MGTOW is really becoming a way of life in some of the Western countries. Now, I wouldn't by any means consider it mainstream, but it definitely is an alternative lifestyle, similar to the gay movement in the 1970s in America and Canada was. In this sense, MGTOW's kind of in that same position at the moment. Now, if we know anything about places like Russia, typically, these alternative movements don't usually gain a lot of momentum and acceptance by the governments. The governments understand often where these type of movements lead towards, and they will do everything possible to avoid the repercussions here. And if we think about a country like Russia, it's very traditional in many ways compared to places like America and Germany or Spain. Russia is still in a position that is far better off with relationships compared to many other European countries nowadays, or European-based countries. Going back though, the alternative lifestyles aren't usually well received by the government there and by the population, by the masses. Likewise, I don't think it's very practical for the average person, and it's actually not often the most beneficial for the common person there, unlike in Western countries. If we look at Western countries, there's a much different system. I actually lived in Russia, as many of you guys may know here, and it's a very different lifestyle over there in some ways. It's hard to sometimes explain in video, but when you go and live there, you understand the mindset is completely different in many ways. And one of the examples I always provide people is that when you live in Russia, relationships are kind of a staple of life. Finding, if you're a solid quality guy, you'll typically find a girlfriend and often a wife if you live in Russia for some time. But the one aspect that I think that's not overly focused is the novelty aspect of the relationships, or the novelty aspect of dating. What dating has become focused on in Western countries is the novelty aspects as we see today. I often compare this to like an appetizer or the salad before the main course. This is kind of the beginning phases of the early dating phases of the relationship. And this is actually where a lot of the relationships stop at in Western countries today. They don't even graduate to the entree or the main course. And I think the main course is like the actual marriage and perhaps even children. That's how I kind of see the main course. People often don't even get this far now in relationships, and this novelty aspect is the major area that I saw wasn't as much of a focus when I was living in Russia. It's sad to say, with the large spectrum of differences amongst population there, that there are people that focus more on the novelty, but I don't think it's as mainstream as it is in Western countries, which creates a mind shift when it comes to dating world. It also means often that I think a guy, when they proceed forth with a relationship, they're going to have to be very committed. There's no being like halfway there. You're going to have to be 100% committed if you're a guy living in a place like Russia. I've heard it's similar also in places like Philippines. You cannot go half-hearted into these setups. And this is often received by both parties, that when the relationship proceeds forward, it proceeds forward. There's no looking back. And this is because it advances, I think, to the main course quicker than in Western countries today. It's interesting because when we look at places like America, when my parents were younger, they actually dated for about 4 years before they were married. And according to them, this was a very long time. This was in the 1970s and 80s era. This was not the norm. People often, in their generation, they were baby boomers, often were married within 2 years. Many people, even before the first year was over, they were married. They were together for a very long time. In the 1980s, this was not the norm. It's not like now. It's really interesting because now in places like America or Germany, this is pretty common. I mean, in Estonia, I personally know of people who've been together for roughly around 8 to 10 years, and they're still not married. No, it's not to say that these people are simply just focusing on novelty components of the relationship, but there's definitely a difference in perspective here. There's a difference in how these relationships are perceived. When we look at a country like Russia, relationships often culminate into marriage within 2 years. This is very common. I remember speaking to my ex-girlfriend in Russia, and she was actually with her former boyfriend before me for almost 2 years, and they were discussing marriage by that point. They were young. Her and her boyfriend were not old, and the family and them were discussing marriage. So this is quite the norm. I mean, kind of moving on to the main course, or entree as I compare it to. And this is understanding the initial phase is often more based around novelty. The novelty is fine. There's positive aspects to this novelty phase, but at the same time, this isn't the main course of the relationship here. Now, going back, is that Russia understands that the novelty parts of relationships are not the focus, and these shouldn't be the highlight of the relationships. It's important to understand. This is most likely why homosexual relationships never took off in Russia, like in many other countries around the world. The Russian government also wants to really increase their population size and maintain population size amongst Russian people, and they understand that these alternative lifestyles often greatly inhibit this. And this is the MGTOW lifestyle is absolutely an alternative lifestyle, and so it often will mean that perhaps 90% of those men 30 years down the road will not have had a marriage and likewise not have had children. And this obviously is not good when you think of depopulation and maintaining the size of a country. MGTOW is also based on this common tenet of individualism. It kind of goes parallel to a very famous author named Iran. She was brought up in a Russian Jewish household and became a very famous author on capitalism and individualism, also in many other areas that were very ahead of its time. She wrote books like Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, Capitalism, an Unknown Ideal. These were all aspects that focus on this individual mindset, and the individualist mindset is not what Russia wants to have. And if we think about how MGTOW operates, the foundation is very much based on individualism. It's based on men pursuing their own passions or their own ways of life and being 100% committed. And that also means not putting energy or hardly any energy into other people, which is required within a relationship and with having children. These ideals all run contrary to the Russian future and what they're hoping to achieve. It's also not a very popular ideal for the masses there, I believe. I don't think common person really identifies with this. I think there's absolutely individuals in Russia that support MGTOW and that are very much in tune with the lifestyle, but this is not mainstream whatsoever. I don't think it will become mainstream. I even with proliferation of technology and other means of information, it still hasn't taken off. It's not became a very popular idea amongst the population. MGTOW also relies much on a certain economic system. Countries that heavily identify with MGTOWism typically have a economic system that is similar to America or Canada. There's a lot of redistribution of wealth to the other gender, to other classes of people. When we look at countries like Russia, you don't see this heavy redistribution of wealth, and it's very complementary, the systems in these countries. It's very old-fashioned for a Western person, so much so that often Western person sees places like Russia as being kind of backwards, as ridiculous as that sounds. That's how far progress we are in the West. Another big reason why I don't see MGTOWism taking off in Russia is because the Western influence is likely to die in the future. As we can see, many countries are surpassing the influence now that America has had for so many years. And then the media and television, all networks, influence coming from the States has been so strong. There's other places now that are also becoming very powerful. As the West continues to decline in the future, and there's other places that are become beacons of wealth, and it's likely also that the ideals that are spread will come from within these places, these countries, not just the West. And if the influence declines, then it's likely that ideals like MGTOWism would also decline, because I don't see other countries. I can't imagine a place like China having this type of tenant mainstream. Perhaps I'm wrong on this. This is also a very important factor to understand, because when we look at the countries where MGTOWism has taken off, it's often countries that had closer ties and stronger influence from the States. Places like Canada and Australia, England, even Germany. These places that have had more direct exposure for a longer amount of time. That's kind of where I see it. But it's very difficult to predict. So that's kind of my take on the matter, and I look forward to getting your feedback below. Thank you.